Thank you very much. For me, it's been a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to always do things with the Evigalas Institute. As Danilo was mentioning, I was here when I was a student 8 years ago. I did one of the summer programs, and it was really influential in the way I started thinking about. It was about capital theory. That was the topic of the seminar. It was very influential. And then I was a fellow, and I always have been involved because of the good work that you guys do. So the topic of the conversation today is Latin America. It's Latin America's economic struggles. Latin America is really a very important case study when it comes to the lack of economic development. Because think about it, we have vast natural resources, we have a very entrepreneurial population, we also had a history with all the favorable structural factors to have economic development. And the reality is that decade after decade, Latin America seems to underperform when it comes to economic development, when it comes to economic growth, when it comes to inequality. In pretty much all governance metrics and all economic indicators, Latin America underperforms the world and underperforms the world compared to its advantages. For example, this is something that has happened historically, but it is also something that just in the last year, from 2014 to 2023, Latin America's growth rate was less than 1% per year. This is way less than the average of the globe. We continue to be the region with the highest inequality, and we continue to be a region overwhelmed with poverty. So as of 2024, 26% of our people are in poverty, and 10% of all Latin Americans live in extreme poverty. This is intolerable given all the capacities and economic potential that our countries have. I will also add that the economic situation of Latin America also compromises our political system, because the more economic exclusion you have, the more poverty you have, the more desperation you have, your political systems then will be constrained and they will be pushed to the limit. So the purpose of this lecture is really to analyze the different factors of why this is happening. I'm here to have a conversation, I'm here to discuss the issue because it's not a simple answer. If it was a simple answer, then the situation would have been fixed before. But it's really a multidisciplinary, multidimensional question in Latin America. Latin America's underperformance, economic underperformance, is not an obvious, it was not an obvious outcome. It was not something that we were destined to happen. Because, for example, centuries ago, Latin American societies, if you compare the North with the South, centuries ago, the South have already social institutions developed. It had a society going on. It had the natural resources, the land, everything, to develop at the same rate or even more than the North. But the reality is that North America and the US really developed, really took over, and Latin America didn't do it. Besides that, think about all the conditions associated with economic development, like natural resources. We have it. Large markets, we have it. Societies that are not involved in war with each other, we have that as well. But compared to all that, we don't grow economically. And the third puzzle when it comes to Latin America's lack of development is that we have tried many recipes. It's not that we have not tried. There has been attempts to rebuild the economy through what they call import substitution industrialization, which is more mercantilistic industrial policies. There has been attempts towards market reforms in the 1990s, what they call the Washington Consensus. And of course, there has been all these socialist experiments as well, especially in the 2000s. And of course, in every single one of these examples, the economy underperformed. It underperformed when they were implementing high tariff industrial policy, but it also underperformed when we were implementing trade and economic liberalization in the 1990s. So the goal here is to start arriving to some answers in Latin America. And while it is tempting to just offer a single explanation, I think there is different explanations. And I think that it's also very important to understand that the main reason that each country in Latin America failed at each specific time is something that we need to take into consideration, because every moment and every context matters a lot. I'm talking about Latin America in a broad perspective, but the reality is that when you analyze Chile or Argentina or Venezuela or Colombia, we are extremely particular countries throughout our history, and we have very specific contexts. It is very important to policymakers to also understand what is achievable and what is not achievable, because we need to really diagnose why we are not having economic development in Latin America, because recipes that do not understand the context tend to fail, and I think that's why it's really important to emphasize that. So I would say that we need to understand the problem of Latin America from different layers. The structural composition of the economy layer, the formal institutions, and also the informal institutions of the economy. And if you analyze each layer, then you can understand what are the problems that we are facing in Latin America. The first layer, I would say, is the structure of the economy. So every economy has its different structure. If you think about Venezuela, our economy is really focused on oil. It's very centered on oil. But if you think about Chile, 70% of its exports come from copper. If you think about the US is totally different economic composition. So every economy has its different economic composition. What are the problems then with Latin America broadly when it comes to the economic composition of our countries? We are extremely concentrated economies. Our economies are extremely concentrated when it comes to sectors. So the natural resource sectors tends to be extremely concentrated and overpower any other sector. We have very concentrated economies when it comes to geography. So we tend to have economies that are very concentrated in the capitals of the country. And I believe that this is a problem for development because it creates bad political economy incentives. So this is one issue that we have. If you have very concentrated sectors, you will have more extractive, rent-seeking economic behavior in the political sphere. You will have more rent-seeking behavior in the elites of the country. You will have less incentive for the provision of public goods in the country, rather than when an economy is diversified. So for example, think about the US. It's not centralized geographically. You have powerhouses in the East Coast, in New York, but you also have powerhouses in California. Now you have also Florida emerging even more. So you have a natural distribution of economic power. Think about sectors also. In the US, you have many sectors that are pushing. You have many sectors that develop. And because of this, then you have a natural tendency of having better political economy in the countries. So in Latin America, that's one issue that we have. So this is on the structural layer. Now, what problems do I see on the formal institution layer? So on the formal institutions, it would be the state institutions of the country, which is another layer of the economy. Latin America historically has been a region in which, by all governance metrics, we tend to underperform. We tend to provide bad quality institutions, bad quality economic institutions and political institutions. When it comes to economic institutions, we rank among the worst in everything, in property rights enforcement, in financial stability and monetary stability, in collective security, in the neutrality of the judicial system, and in all these institutions that are extremely important for economic growth. There is different ways to understand formal institutions. There is institutions that create markets. There is institutions that stabilize markets. There is institutions that build legitimacy for markets. In all these domains, Latin America underperforms. And because of this, then we are constantly governed by suboptimal arrangements. Think about, for example, the fact that 70% of our workforce is an informal workforce. We don't have contracts in Latin America. think about also the fact that most people in Latin America are not financially included. They don't have even bank accounts in Latin America. Think about the problem of the lack of functioning in the judicial system. The judicial system does not function. Think about the collective security. We don't have security in Latin America. So we have gangs running cities. We have gangs even running jails. So because of all these factors, then you don't have good quality of policy institutions or state institutions. That's the second layer of issues that we have. The third layer of problems will be the informal institutions of the country. What are the informal institutions? Is our mental models about how we see the world, is our political belief, or normative belief, is our social norms. All these societal factors, we are also deficient in many of them. Which social norms are good for economic growth? For example, high levels of trust among people is good for growth because it decreases transaction costs. It allows people to do business. In Latin America, we have very high distrust in our societies. And again, we can talk later about the reasons of why, but this is something that is happening. We also have lower levels of self-reliance. We don't have this intrinsic self-belief about ourselves that in other societies you have. Like for example, in the American society. In the American society, you have people really committed to the belief that if you work hard, you will be okay. You will have a good standard of living. In Latin America, we don't have that. We don't have the belief that social mobility is possible. From the political side, we have also damaging belief. We think that the economy is a zero-sum game. We think that if somebody gets rich, it's because another person gets poor. We think that if somebody is successful, it's because of luck or corruption, and not because of self-determination and hard work. And you also, of course, have this tendency to over-empower the state and over-empower specific political actors, to give too much power to you. In Latin America, you don't have this long tradition of individual liberties that you have in the US. And later we can talk about why this is the case, but this is a fact. This is a fact of our societies. And all these lead to bad policy outcomes, and they lead to bad economic outcomes. But the reality is that if people believe about these ideas, it's because they see something in them. If somebody believes that the economy is zero-sum game, it's because in many Latin American societies, it's like that. In the sense that the economy does not reward people for working hard. It rewards people for being politically connected. Think about the economy of Venezuela, think about the economy of Nicaragua, think about the most extreme example, the economy of Cuba. If people don't have self-belief that their own effort can lead them to a better life, the reality is that in many Latin American countries, it's very difficult to go from being in poverty towards middle class. It's extremely difficult. Doesn't matter how hard you work. So people are disincentivized to believe in that. So if you think about the three layers of the economy, you think about the structural factors. Do you have oil? You don't have oil? How is your geographic, economic sectors, etc. If you think about the formal institutions of the country, what are your laws? What are your economic and political institutions? And if you think about the informal institutions of a country, you can see problems in all of them in Latin America. And then there is a lot of time wasted, or not wasted, but spent by academics thinking about which of these is the factor. What is the problem? Is the way we believe about the world? Is our political institutions? Or is that we are born condemned to poverty because of the way our economies are structured, or because of something happened in colonialism 200, 300 years ago? I think that the right way to approach it is to analyze and to understand that it's like a feedback loop that goes from one to the other. If you have bad political ideas, you will have bad political institutions. But if you have bad economic structure, then that will also influence the way you see the world. And it's like a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle that societies can go into. The biggest example, I would say, is the connection between economic exclusion and political turmoil. Why do we have so much political turmoil in Latin America? Partially, it's because of how much economic poverty and desperation and exclusion we have. When people feel that their economic institutions betray them, when they cannot buy a house, when they cannot move forward with their life, they will vote for radical solutions. They will vote for extremist solutions. And they will vote for people that want to completely reshape the system. That will bring political turmoil. And political turmoil will, in turn, bring even more distrust from the investment community, more volatility from the economic side. So countries really fast can go into a spiral of decay and deterioration. Think about the example of Venezuela. Venezuela was growing a lot during the 20th century. From 1920 to 1980, Venezuela grew at 6.4% per year. It was the highest GDP growth of any country. Our GDP per capita was 2.5 times the average of the region. So everything was going well until the 1980s. Then we had 2 extremely bad decades of economic stagnation. 1980s is known in Latin America as the lost decade because no country grew at the time because of a combination of high interest rates and the result of bad economic policies. And in the 1990s, we also didn't grow in Venezuela, and that brought massive dissatisfaction for the system. And that led to the socialist revolution that ended up destroying the country. So from a bad economic situation, it became a bad political situation, and then the country entered into a spiral of crisis over crisis. And this is why the process of economic reforms is so delicate, so difficult, because it's very easy to break. You have all these social institutions, political institutions that are implicitly accepted by society and followed by society. But once some of these norms are broken, or one of these factors is broken, it can then damage all the other factors. That's why, from my perspective, people's economic outlook and economic hope is not just a matter of economics, it's a matter of political stability in all these countries. And all the solutions that policymakers do in Latin America, they need to understand the 3 layers. Because if you fix only the political institutions, but you don't fix the economic structure, and you don't fix also the way people see the world, then it's very shaky, it's very difficult. But if you only change, or you only try to change the way people see the world, but you don't change the way they actually experience the world, they will not buy also your narrative. So that's, I would say, really important. So if this diagnostic is correct, and again, my hope here is that we can have an interesting intellectual conversation. What can we, or what should we focus on Latin America? What should we do? Or what issues should we try to fix? Understanding that every country matters, and every country has different contexts and different situations and different histories. And also understanding that the reforms that you will take, there is no predetermined rules or list or sequencing. Each policymaker has to analyze that in isolation. Economic policy is a science in the sense that you understand what models you can use, how you can shape incentives, how you can build specific institutions. But it's an art in the sense of understanding the sequence of reforms, understanding how to communicate the reforms, understand which shape you will actually build institutions from. That's an art, because policymakers need to really understand their societies and their context in order to do so. So understanding that, what is like the broad analysis that we can do in Latin America? So the first one is that no development can happen if you don't have the basic fundamentals, the basic economic institutions for growth. We are not talking even about specific or different strategies. We're not talking about the difference of free market economics or more industrial policy. But there is some transversal economic policies that all economic systems agree on that we lack in Latin America. That's a fact. For example, every policy strategy requires strong property rights, a strong enforcement of property rights, a strong registry of property rights. We don't have that in Latin America. Every economic strategy needs collective security. The fact that if you open a business, or if you're a worker, or if you're walking on the street, gangs will not overwhelm you. They will not control the territory of the country. All economic strategies need a financial system that effectively protects people's savings and channels savings to investment, and that protects people's hard work and their labor. We don't have that in Latin America. Most people in Latin America don't even have access to financial services. Most people in Latin America that even have a bank account, they only use the bank account to cash in and cash out. When it comes to property rights, most people don't have even the registry of their house ownership, the ownership of their any kind of assets they have. So these are transversal economic policies that we need to have in order to even think about implementing other kind of reforms. How or in which sequencing to do that, I think it really depends on a specific context. So what will be the second broad recommendation? Is that you need to find ways to move away the economies of Latin America from how concentrated they are on a specific sector. Economies cannot be only about oil, or only about copper, or only about a specific city or geographic location. Not only because it would deliver suboptimal economic outcomes, but politically it creates extremely bad incentives for rent-seeking behavior, for state capture, and ultimately to take away democracy from the country. So you need to find ways to really diversify and to open up the economic space. The third one is that you need to have a narrative in Latin America to bring back people's belief that if they work hard, they can go ahead. If they rely on themselves, they can build a future for themselves. That the economy is not a zero-sum game, but actually if you have collaboration and cooperation between people, you can build better businesses, better economic sector, better future for the country. You need to also develop narratives that empower the individual more than the state. I think this is something that all Latin American countries we share, is an over-reliance on the state, over-reliance on the state capacity to lead countries. And that's something that transversally across Latin America we need to do. The fourth, I would say, thing that we need to all of us consider is that including people in the economy, bringing people to the economy, is essential for the political stability and future of Latin America. It's essential for the cohesion of Latin America. Right now we live in a society in which 60%, 70% of our population are excluded in one way or another. They are either in poverty, but even if they are not in poverty, they live in extra-legal society. So they don't have a formal contract when they work. Their business is not formally registered. If they have a house, they don't have a contract, they don't have an agreement that protects the house ownership. So they live in complete limbo and in a lot of instability. And that's a society that in every second can explode politically. Even if the society themselves is growing, person by person, individually, the people feel extremely insecure about their future. And when people feel insecure about their future, they will vote for radical ideas, they will vote for politicians that promise things that are not achievable in the short term. So these are like the broad overall angles about Latin America. If you understand that, you will be ahead of most discussions, because most discussions in Latin America sadly focus at either one of the three layers. So they focus either on the political issues, they argue that we need to change a specific politician or political party, or they say that we are condemned eternally because of the way that we see the world, or by our colonization, or they say that we are condemned because of the resource course, because we're born with resources. But if you understand that it's a dynamic, it's a feedback loop, I think you can think about changes in our countries. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.